3 weeks beyond the wall, and little Sam Tarly had yet to run through his rations. Salted beef, mulled wine, potatoes to be boiled were just a few of the delicacies remaining to him. His horse had not eaten so well, and would tire earlier and earlier into each day as the weeks passed. Staying warm was not difficult while making his way through the haunted forest. Trees were plenty to burn and provided necessary cover. His heading continued to the northeast, and it would eventually take him through a familiar ranger outpost, Craster's Keep. Constant supply runs through the years kept Craster's Keep well supplied for passing rangers, mostly for their horses. The lack of any wildling presence made it as safe as it was remote. Little Sam proceeded down an embankment, and his sure-footed horse twisted and swung around numerous thick tree trunks. A clearing had presented itself as the tree line melted away. The tall pickets protecting the keep had burned and rotted away. They once protected the keep, until only a skeleton remained. The second ranger had reached his outpost, and his birthplace. His horse feasted on the damp straw as its ranger filled the manger. Little Sam started a fire and helped himself to the remaining rations. Night had crept over the keep as Sam explored the grounds more thoroughly. He searched for any sign of previous rangers. The Lord Commander had said very little regarding their mission, but his own was very clear: find them quickly. His trek had come easier than he was expecting. Summer snows were rare during the drought, as were the rains in the southern kingdoms. Sam's father had mentioned this in his letters more times than Sam could count. After 2 nights, Sam rode out of Craster's with a full belly and a rested horse. Nearly 2 weeks had passed as Sam trekked northeast. He had been north of the wall for nearly a month when he unexpectedly arrived at the Shivering Sea. He must have lost track of how much time had passed when he came across a watchman's cloak and sword. It was impossible to ascertain how long they were there, or whether they belonged to the rangers he was trying to locate. The blood-stained snow remained under the cloak, but neither flesh nor bone remained. Maybe wolves, Sam thought to himself. Either way, there was a naked, unarmed ranger in need of assistance. It's doubtful a bear asked his brother to unrobe before eating him. Upon further investigation, Sam noticed a skull, shining bright white, on its perch of vivid red. Sam examined it closer. It could have been a fossil, if it wasn't for the tacky red blood left behind. Odd, isn't it? Sam said aloud, almost speaking to his horse. Gulls whined overhead as waves crashed over the shoreline. Sam would find a cove somewhere farther north. Perhaps some shallow water spearfishing would provide a break from the salted beef he dined on continuously. A small campfire crackled as the white fish sizzled slightly. Once he had served himself, he immediately put out the campfire to try and restore his night vision. He constantly peered over the horizon, always looking for signs or indications he was on the right track. Finally, for the first time since he departed the wall, he saw signs of life other than his own. From the side of his cove, off in the distance, he strained to be sure his eyes were not playing tricks on him. A small fire was seen on the ridgeline. A brief calculation made his eyes widen. The only thing north of him on this shoreline was Hardhome. Sam quietly dined on his fried whitefish, contemplating his next move. The fire was miles to the north. He could sleep well and move out at first light, or follow this possible mirage off a steep cliff on this moonless night. Sam decided. Any true ranger would push onward, given this possible lead. The Lord Commander was counting on him, and him alone. Sam trotted his horse quietly along the shoreline. He presented an easy target for an ambush of any size, but the lack of moonlight made it the more stealthy option. Once the shoreline no longer provided onward movement north, Sam dismounted and secured his horse. He cautiously climbed the rocks and boulders that obstructed his path. The height would provide proper line of sight to his target. To Sam's surprise, he achieved an overwatch of Hardhome itself. He had not realized he had made it so far north so quickly. The smoldering embers of the campfire that led him here were almost extinguished. It provided very little as far as reconnaissance. Sam decided to wait until dawn, observe what he could, and move again once night presented itself to him once more. Come first light, movement started to stir. He could make out 2 men around the remains of the campfire, fast asleep. The many cabins surrounding the courtyard were where the men slept, and its occupants scurried about. They were tall, skinny, almost floating over the snow that covered the ground. They were just odd enough to make Sam's stomach a little queasy. Men, warriors, wolves worried Sam very little, but Sam knew of the supernatural that plagued these lands, though he had never witnessed it himself. Sam's attention was again drawn to a single man leaving one cabin and then approaching the next. Sam saw his knees bend, which was a relief. He was just a man, and a man with no weapon as Sam could see. His cloak was a pale blue, and very thin, too thin to properly protect a man this far north. Sam continuously observed until the sky had begun to darken again. The sleeping men, under their cloaks, had refused to move through the course of the entire day. This would be Sam's first investigation. He slowly climbed down off his perch, occasionally pushing small stones over the edge to the dull thud on the snow below. Sam drew his sword and approached the bodies near the cold campfire. He slowly pulled the black cloak aside, revealing that which he had seen previously, a bloody pool and a bright white skull. His heart raced and his brow moistened. He quickly pulled the other cloak aside. It was not black, patchy, thin, almost as if it was made of squirrel hides. More blood, more skulls. Just then, Sam heard the unmistakable sound of a horse scream. His horse. The screams began to become more pronounced and louder, closer, until it was ringing in his ears. He sprinted for cover. He was now known to whoever these people were. His horse continued screaming. It was surely dead already, though the screams persisted. This was dark magic. Sam dropped his sword and covered his ears while crouching between two cabins. The screams were deafening as Sam's mouth hung open. He couldn't even know if it was screaming himself, because his horse was all he could hear. The sound abruptly stopped. His ears continued to ring. He was on his knees, face buried in snow, with gloved hands over his head. He stirred slightly, just as then a searing pain sliced through his boot. He reacted immediately to inspect the cause of the injury. His boot had been cut through cleanly, and he bled profusely. This was not an animal bite. Only the sharpest steel could have cut so cleanly. Sam rose painfully to his feet, retrieved his sword, and started limping towards his horse to find out what remained of him. As Sam turned the corner, he looked for the next cover point. He scanned across the campfire to see the slender man, in his thin blue silk, hood up covering most of his face, and a blade in his hand. His back was turned to Sam as he slowly began the process of attempting an escape. A fight was not out of the question, but Sam was injured, and he had no idea how many men were present, though he had only seen one at a time. Every few steps Sam would pause to listen. Unfortunately, the steps in the snow continued as he paused. Sam knew he was being followed. He just had to get to the other side of this large boulder to get to his horse, who he prayed was unharmed. The pain of his heel throbbed, and he started to feel lightheaded. His gloves, soaked with the blood of his heel, had become tacky, and his gloved fingers stuck together as he handled his sword. Sam sensed the enemy closing. It wouldn't be that difficult, given his slow process. Sam finally, successfully flanked around the boulder to see his horse missing. His shoulders slumped as he turned to face whatever was behind him. Before he had squared his shoulders, he felt a powerful impact with his chest that knocked the wind from him. Sam fell to his knees to see a blade protruding out of his chest. Sam's remaining energy left to him as he raised his head to closely see the hooded man approaching him. His face remained obscured, but Sam could clearly see the man's blue lips smiling at him. Sam collapsed to the ground, his mission incomplete. He found 3 bodies, but only 2 were black brothers, and one he could not identify. Suddenly then the pain stopped, as did the feeling of the bitter cold.